Sure, enter into the true and actual state. This is very, I won't say it's Chinglish exactly, but it's really kind of stiff. Enter into the true and actual state. And then we had Shinam, Chi Shu, fully able to know.
Oh, wait.
Hold on, Marty, we forgot to set up the microphone.
No microphone. Oh, they can see you.
Wonderful wordless thought.
Make sure the light side is facing down, Marty. The light side. That side is front, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Good job. Whichever one.
Okay, good.
No, we're okay? Yes?
Yes.
We had a technical difficulty there. I was talking, but nobody could hear it, which is probably one of the best talks I've ever given. Any event, here we are. What I was saying is we're on page 38, 39, finishing up a section of text. All of those lines above ending with, this is the karma that should be done. And I was saying I wanted to continue just to stress something I feel is really important, and something I'm coming to more and more the longer I look into this material, into these texts. The carryover from last week is we had a lot of language or concepts, verbs having to do with contemplate, reflect, fully able to know, behold. For example, the Ruyu, Chun Shijing, this one, as I said, was really kind of Chinglish, enter into the true and actual state. Really it means to have true realization, truly realize things as they are. And then we had Shineng, Chi Shu, fully able to know. And this is not just able to know about something outside, but to know wholly and completely means to know through oneself. So it's not just knowing about that, but it's also a profound self-knowledge. And at some point, that profound self-knowledge, knowing fully this capacity, the human capacity, perfected in its knowing ability, only then does it know that. It doesn't know that except through the transformation of this. Then we had a line like Xi Zhu Wu Bian Jie. Again, it goes back to really know or behold well. So here's maybe what I wanted to stress again, because this week I got a couple of emails from people who were listening and weighed in and gave some contributions. And this is something I'm wanting to build into an actual sort of portfolio of new ideas of how to come at this Buddhist material, especially the art of translation. And the art of translation is really the art of transformation, because all translation's interpretation, all interpretation comes through this: mind, body, emotions, faculties. And so the translation is only as good and accurate and inspiring. I was going to say inspired, but I mean inspiring. And this is something Hanshan said of translation: it has to be both accurate and inspiring. Without those two, it doesn't convey. For that to happen, that interpretation to be resonant and accurate, inspiring, the translator, the interpreter, has to be a conduit for that sound, for that content. Without the transformation of the translator, the interpreter, there's no inspiration. And I would say probably it'll fall short on accuracy as well. So we use, and we struggle to use the best available English we have to render these texts that are in the Avatamsaka here, primarily in Chinese. But there's something more that is implied in these texts that the English cannot convey. And the English, I mean, not just because it's English. I'm not so sure that the Chinese per se conveys it. Chinese of this is just Chinese words, characters. But the spirit, what it's meant to activate, has to be something that's coming through the interchange of the person looking at those words and the very manner in which they're able to understand and perceive. So whether it's in English or Chinese, the same problem is there. How do you get and retrieve what this is really talking about? There is a French philosopher that is more familiar to us now in our program at DRBU, because most people are reading him in one way or another, Pierre Hadot. And he reminds us that the original meanings, in other words, the words we're using from the English, reflect, contemplate, spiritual, fully know, understand. These words originally had much more dynamic totalness to them that involved doing and how to live. Basically, spiritual transforming was in the language to begin with. And last week I brought this up a little bit, how just a simple word like contemplate had a profound, engaged, activating, total transformative thrust to it. It wasn't just dry or even just descriptive. Even though that's the case, what Hadot is talking about, and the reason he's writing, is because he feels that original thrust of those teachings has been lost. Basically calling it the poverty or the sickness of modern philosophy. That it doesn't address these deep dimensions anymore, and it doesn't activate this quest for embodied understanding and wisdom, but rather translates a very sterile, dualistic, abstract kind of over-intellectualized understanding, but doesn't change the spirit. So what I'm trying to say here is, even though we try our best with these words, there's something behind the words that we're trying to get at. I think one way I would think about it is, I've used the idea of embodied learning. I would also use assimilative, to assimilate. And assimilate actually means to incorporate, incorporate into the body, into the being. So it's incorporating these sagely teachings into one's behavior. That's the marker of good translation, not simply that it's on the page and even articulate or elegant, but rather it catalyzes a change, a corporal change in the way we feel, the way we see, the way we smell, the way we use our sense organs, the way we relate to each other, and even the natural world. Something is fundamentally different in our behavior, in our way of being. So I use the word assimilative or assimilate. Also, assimilate can mean, very interesting, absorb as in digestion, which I think, again, is a more visceral way of getting at what these texts are trying to do. Even our best translations, I don't know that they convey it. There has to be some laboratory dynamic experience going on with the study and the translation of these texts that take us to a new level of understanding in the one who is doing it, the one who's studying it. In other words, the method of study cannot be divorced from the method of practice. And I come back to this because it seems so obvious, and yet, if you study this only as a written work, or if you study this as a philosophical doctrine, or if you study that even the point of just memorizing it, but not digesting it, not taking into almost like a new being born as a result of this, it's not alive, it's not vital, it's not medicine, and it's just words on paper. So one of the things that came to me as a colleague who works with Taoist text, and what I'm finding with the people I'm working with across the East and South Asian traditions, it seems like many of the texts, and I would not discount many of the Western texts as Hadot points to, but the one I'm most familiar with in the last 30, 40 years are these texts, Confucian, Taoist, Indian, Buddhist. This colleague is working in the Taoist material, and I'll read you a passage from what he just wrote, an essay, trying to get at what it is about these Taoist works, what's at the heart of them. And he says, these texts are meant to be accessed, activated contemplatively, and not just cognitively. So there has to be both an active investigation linguistically, analytically on them, and at the same time a stilling and quieting and an emptying of the mind and heart in order that they be absorbed in a different way. So that's a combination of the two. He says, in the contemplative experience, the practitioner does not come to know something. Whoa, wait a minute. See, this is where knowing. In the contemplative experience, the practitioner does not come to know something, but rather the practitioner has changed him or herself. The person, this is his words, the person is remade, becoming like an infant or a newborn. This is wonderful language. The point is not what the experience leads to, but what the experience consists in. That is transformation. The practitioner acts or moves not according to something he knows, but something he has become. The knowing of the result is different, not because there's a different understanding, but one has become something else. Have we lost sound again?
Oh, I think, Jinchuan, is this supposed to be, I think this might be too wrong here.
No.
Yeah. They shouldn't be in conference mode, right?
Not hearing any of it?
They're still hearing some static beeping and stuff.
Beeping. No beeping in the room. Maybe this thing.
Was that not heard?
I think it was heard.
Yeah, just the quality.
Try again, Marty.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they could hear you, Marty. It's just that there was some kind of beeping static in the background.
You want me to pick up again?
Please continue, yeah.
Okay. This is what this scholar, colleague, means by wu wei, without doing. The practitioner acts and moves and does, but as wu wei, and that means not according to something he knows, but according to something he has become. Thinking that one first gains knowledge is an interpretation that never breaks the hold of the problem of the will, or the tension between knowing and willing. Only a transformation of being can overcome the central human problem of the will, and indeed the ultimate remedy Taoist practice brings. And then he concludes, the problem is taking the language about the oneness with the Tao, which is often presented as what the purpose of the study is, oneness with the Tao, or unity with the Tao, as referential in use at all. These expressions are not pointing towards something named Tao. It is an expression used to report the consciousness of a new being that has emerged as a result of contemplative practice. Did you follow that? Any questions? I mean, it's a little rich, but basically saying you don't unite with the Tao, you don't understand the Tao. It's a report of consciousness of a new being that has emerged as a result of contemplative practice. And finally, another piece that came to me just this week from another friend and colleague. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I have watched with anticipation and excitement the shift in the understanding of these Buddhist texts, and not just these Buddhist texts, the texts I'm talking about, over decades now, as a growing body of scholar practitioners are coming to realize the richness and profundity of these texts and the limitation of the standard paradigms we give to learning and understanding that we put on top of these. These are almost three-dimensional texts. They're meant to be taken not only through the eyes and the ears and whatnot, but actually incorporated physically into one's being. I told you again the exchange that happened at Gold Mountain Monastery when a scholar came and asked to the essence of Buddhism. The master said, change. Change is the essence of Buddhism. And this goes back to, if you are studying this text correctly and understanding it correctly, you will not be the same person that opened the text, that closes the text. You will be a different person. He uses the word here, remade, like a child born anew. So this is the other passage. This is from a work on the three nature doctrine in Huayan Buddhism. In Buddhism, quote, I'm quoting, intellectual progress is meaningful only if it brings about spiritual progress. And there's no such thing as pure speculation or knowledge for knowledge's sake. Much modern misinterpretation of Buddhist teachings stem from the failure to apprehend this soteriological intent of Buddhist philosophy. Soteriological meaning to change and transform and liberate. And so he's saying the misinterpretation, both in the translation, but even in the way we look at it and misplace it as some object of study rather than a almost like a living body of energy that we take in and makes us different, results in the misinterpretation, misunderstanding of this. So I just wanted to finish on that theme a little bit this week because these two entries came to me and I think they both tie in importantly to what we're looking at. So I will pause. Any questions on that? Any comments? Anybody sort of follow this? I know I've been talking about it more maybe than you would like to hear, but I think our old habits die slowly. And we still continue to read these things as if they're about that and not about this. And until we read them as about this, in other words, as mirrors rather than windows, we're going to miss at least half, if not maybe all, of their intent, what they're about, what their purpose is. So somehow the paradigm we enter as we do this material requires us to really think differently about the whole nature of study and understanding, and what's the best framing and what's the best model to use in accessing this material. Originally, many people were interested in Buddhism because, I'm thinking of the early translators, many who were missionaries, because they wanted to learn about them, the people that held and believed these things. They wanted to learn about them so they could better convert them. The next stage that happened later as they got into it, and some of the most interesting people that got into it were surprised that there was something there actually very rich and profound. Then it went from learning about them to learning from them. That was the second stage, I would say, historically, the study of the text, and then became interesting. Oh, look at this idea of self. This is very interesting compared to Western psychology, of impermanence, of orthopraxy, the idea of non-attachment, and so forth. And they began to, and theories of the cosmos, they began to apply to biology, to physics. We had a phase where the interest of physics in Buddhism, then recently the neuroscience, and we're learning from them, taking bits and pieces of this teaching, and then hanging them onto various disciplines that we study and say, oh, there's some interesting interchange here and whatnot. But I think the next phase, and the phase probably is going to be the most interesting, is the learning through them. Not just about them or from them, but actually through them. And that's transformative learning or assimilative learning, or incorporating learning. That to me is the phase we are just really starting to enter now. And this is why the proper study of this involves a whole system of rituals, devotions, of a monastic community, of people devoting their lives to this, and looking at this as a total way of being rather than something out there that we study and do not fundamentally change the position we're standing from as we study it. And so it's ever out there. And it's very much like the Avatamsaka says, like the chef who prepares succulent food and then stands back and looks at it and doesn't taste it. Mere study is the same. I'm quoting the text directly. And it goes through a number of examples. A deaf musician who writes a wonderful piece, a sonata or a cantata, but cannot hear it. Mere study is the same way. So even in the text itself, it's pointing us to a different approach. And I'm just happy now to see more and more people who are actually in the scholarly realm starting to appreciate this and starting to talk about it. It's actually quite exciting. And I think what's going to happen is these texts are going to move to another platform, and probably one in which the world is in sore need of right now, because most of our paradigms are pretty flat and stagnant and at impasses. Our relationship to ourselves psychologically has sort of reached a kind of stayed impasse of various paradigms we use. Our social relationships, to a large extent, are frozen or repetitive, and certainly our relationship to the natural world has reached somewhat of a uninspired dead end of approaches. So much to this, so that in all three dimensions, you could say we are not moving forward, we're moving backward. Or at best, we're staying in the same place. And I feel approaching these texts with this material in an incorporeal, assimilative way could really regenerate and restart not only a conversation, but a transformation of creativity in ways that we relate to ourselves, to each other, and to the natural world. So I'm very, very excited about that. Anyhow, was there any comments or questions on that? I'm sorry if I bored you with my new excitements, but for someone like myself who's been doing this for years, I always sense this potential, and the reason I stay with it is because it delivers at this level. It makes me different every day, even if I resist being different. every time I come to these texts, I'm pushed beyond my comfort zone. And I've learned over time that that's probably a good thing. My comfort zone is pretty complacent. So anyhow. Okay, no questions, comments? Roll on. Okay. We're looking at the text. I'm going to read the first part in English because we've read it before. It's the refrain. I'm looking at the beginning of page 39 and this is the interlude. At that time, light passed through 10,000 worlds, and everywhere illumined 100,000 worlds in the east. It was also like this in the south, the west, the north, the four intermediate directions, as well as above and below. Within each of these worlds, there were 1 billion Jambudvipas, reaching up to 1 billion ultimate form heavens. I believe, at least in my text, that is not capitalized, and I think it should be capitalized because that's actually one of the heavens, the form heavens, the desired, and the formless. So, at least in my text, I don't see it capitalized, and it should be. Because Jambudvipas, for example, a technical term, that's capitalized. All of these were clearly revealed in this light. Just as in this place one could see the thus come one seated on his lotus flower treasury lion's throne, with bodhisattvas as many as 5 motes of dust in 10 Buddha lands circumambulating him, so too in each of those billions of Jambudvipas there were billions of thus come ones seated in the same way. And because of the spiritual power of the Buddha, in each of the 10 directions there was a great bodhisattva, who was accompanied by bodhisattvas to the number of 5 motes of dust in 10 Buddha lands, who came to the Buddha's place. Their names were Manjushri and others. They came from countries called Golden Colored World and others, and the Buddhas they served were called Unmoving Wisdom, Thus Come One, and others. At that time, in the presence of all those Buddhas, the voices of Manjushri bodhisattvas in all those places rang out in unison as they spoke verses. And maybe we can just read the first couple verses in Chinese and then get started on the new verse section. 若以未得四种族，二见人中跳有时，是为病眼颠倒见，吾不能持罪伤法。 Maybe the next one. 如来四行就相等，一切世间莫能次。以那有界共思量，思想为得转无边。 And as we I'll just read the English that's here, and then we'll see if we can't play around, I say, with the English a little bit. If one uses awesome virtue, form, or race to look for the taming and regulating master of peoples, this is like a disease of the eyes which causes one's seeing to be distorted. Such a one cannot know the most supreme Dharma. The thus come one's form, appearance, marks, and so on cannot be fathomed by anyone in the world. If throughout 10 million nayutas of kalpas one tried to comprehend them, still aspects of forms, marks, and awesome virtue have turning without bounds. So you see, just on these two verses, a link. You have awesome virtue, form, and race, and then you end with aspects of form, marks, awesome virtue, almost a duplicate saying these qualities. What is meant by virtue, what is meant by form, or better would be appearances, characteristics or appearances. The first one is saying this is not an accurate way to try to understand and get at a Buddha, a Tathagata, thus come one. This is a superficial way to approach the understanding and the meeting, if you will. How does one meet the Tathagata? This is not meant to be sort of like, where do I go to find the Tathagata? Is the Tathagata in some place or is the Tathagata or the Buddha associated with some country or ethnicity or race? Or is it something that I can see with my ordinary eyes as being exuding lights and qualities and figures? You say, first of all, the first one says, that's not the way to look at this. And the second verse is saying, and even if you were looking at this, the manifestations, the variations of this, the turnings of these characteristics and so forth are boundless. There's no end to them. And so it's really both a misplaced way of looking, and even if you do look, there's so many variations that you would not be able to calculate them. This goes along the line of, let's just say, someone like Guanyin Bodhisattva, who appears in multiple different faces and forms and bodies to teach and transform. You see this also in the later chapters of the Avatamsaka Sutra, especially in entering the Dharma realm. All the many different forms and manifestations that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas take on to teach and transform. Sometimes unremarkable, sometimes scary, sometimes beautiful, sometimes ugly. So if you're going down this road, it's saying the many turns and manifestations of this are just, the permutations are endless, and you won't be able to nail down here. You're missing the point in going after this way. So just a little bit, though, to look at the translation. I would change race here. This on the first line of one uses awesome virtue. And I would change form to appearances. Basically outward appearances, if you really wanted to be persistent here. Outward appearances. Awesome virtue is referring to the appearance of virtue, which would be the awe-inspiring spiritual penetrations, say, of an enlightened being. Even that is not something you can look for and rely on. And then finally they use race here, which is an old word, an old term. This is, in Chinese, it's not specifically race. It refers to a clan or to an ethnicity, which is, I think, a better use of this. Basically an identity group that's based on similarities in ethnicity and language, in physiognomy, and even probably geographical location. Probably on the earliest, this was referring to the various divisions within the Indian society of the four stages. You had Brahmins and Kshatriyas and Chandalas, which were the untouchables and so forth. Let me see, so there's Brahmins. The Buddha's caste was Kshatriya. I'm missing one. Chandalas were the untouchables.
They're Shudras, which is the slaves. Shudras.
Shudra.
They're the slaves, but there's the merchant class.
Ah, okay. And in various societies, you have divisions like this of caste and class. You have maybe the ruling class, the aristocracy, and then you have the merchant class or the bourgeoisie, and then you have the peasant class or the petit bourgeoisie, and then you have the unwashed masses, sometimes referred to, everybody else who doesn't fit in there. This is rather universal, even though sometimes people claim they don't have this. I haven't been to any country or group where this kind of discrimination does not apply. And people say, wow, America doesn't apply. Bull. There are divisions of caste and class in America as well. Maybe they're not as rigid, maybe they're not as explicit, but boy, you'll know if you step outside of them or knock on the wrong door. So this is something we grow up with, and because we grow up with it, we're less conscious of it once we find our place in caste. But people who come from the outside are quite alarmed and shocked when they discover it. I had a colleague who was French, and he said the thing he enjoyed most about America when he came here was that he could advance on the basis of his merit and his accomplishments and not because of his background and upbringing. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I scored high on the national exam. Of the 1,000 students that took it, I was number 5. And so I wished to go on for my doctorate. And my professors took me inside and said, we're not going to accept you into a doctorate program. You can go on to a professional. And he said, well, why is it I scored high? He said, well, we're doing you a favor. I said, what do you mean you're doing a favor? He said, well, frankly, sir, your mother was just a school teacher. And so you would not be comfortable among the doctors. Whoa. And he was really upset. He just thought on the basis of his accomplishments he would go on. And so as a result of that, I'm just telling you the story, it's kind of interesting. He went out and he painted a picture, and I've seen the picture, and it shows a really angry young man. It's really well done. And he went out and he was playing chess with a friend of his who was a visiting scholar from America, a black person who was there in a Fulbright. And the scholar said, you don't seem to be concentrating too well today. What's wrong? And he said, I'll tell you what's wrong. And he told him the story. And about 3 weeks later, that visiting professor came back and said, look, I just talked to some colleagues in the United States. We can offer you a full ride to our university if you'd like to come and study here. And he took it. And that made all the difference in his life. And I'd never understood that maybe French society could be this way. And it's also true of English society and Indian society and American society. So all I'm saying here, if we're diverting a little bit, this is suggesting here that looking for the Tathagata, looking for the enlightened being in these artificial divisions of appearances and ethnicity and clan is not the way to go about it. Taming and regulating master is just another epithet for the Buddha, and it's referring to qualities of, again, if you look at this, of the teacher. Given what I was talking about earlier, you don't just have a teacher who dispenses knowledge, but you have a taming and regulating teacher. That is something that's working on the body, the emotions, the habits of you. So you are entering into a relationship, not just receiving information or data, hence the limitations of online enlightenment. What you're getting is a taming and regulating. So when you see Manjushri on top of a lion, it's not like he's amused or enamored with riding on an animal. It shows that he has tamed and subdued the lion of his own nature, the wildness. And so he rides easy in this. So these images we have to look at in a different way. Again, pointing to embodied teaching as opposed to just passed on through language and words. So taming and regulating is one of the qualities the teacher, the sage, does. Also, it's the qualities too, you'll see if you look at the Guanyin Bodhisattva image, you'll see both the inspiring and the subduing elements. Inspiring, kind, compassionate, generosity, pulling out the best in you. But also, knowing what human nature's tendencies can be, this very scary, subduing, awesome face and figures. And if you look at the Guanyin image, you'll see both those. On one side, you have the kind, compassionate, generous sort of mother figure. And on the back, you have the scary, awesome martial artist, almost ghost being that subdues the wildness. It's not to scare or to enslave with fear, but rather to wake up from a wrong path. I would say then, maybe change this, and I'm just going to suggest this tonight, we'll pause here. If one hopes to behold, I'm rerunning these lines now. If one hopes to behold the taming and regulating master of people by looking at his awe-inspiring virtue, appearance, class, or ethnic clan, that's how I'd render those two lines. If one hopes to behold the taming master of people by looking at or looking for then I would say the next line would be, this is like a disease of the eyes which clouds and distorts one's vision. The original, I think, was different. What was the original? This is like a disease of the eyes which causes one's seeing to be distorted. I think that is rather awkward. This is a little better, but it could be polished a lot more. This is like a disease of the eyes which clouds and distorts one's vision. And you see, this is very interesting because this appears throughout the text. And I find it very interesting that the problem of misunderstanding, or what we call ignorance, in Buddhism is seen as a lack of inner clarity. And the eye is used as one, it's compared to, in the Shurangama, they use the word cataract. And so misunderstanding or attachment, habituations, not understanding the liberating thrust to say the precepts, create a cataract in one's ability to see things as they really are. And so the problem is not so much that you have to have more knowledge, but there has to be a clearing of the mind, or the eyes here as a metaphor. Cataracts cloud, but you can also have macular degeneration. Diseases of the eyes are really interesting, and that's where you lose your center vision. Very interesting. You don't see the center anymore. You don't see the core. You're constantly seeing only peripheral. And so if you carry the metaphor very interestingly, you no longer see Zhong, you no longer see the center, but you're seeing the periphery, you're seeing the superficials. That's why the Tao Te Ching says a person with desires only sees the peripherals. The person without desires sees the core. And it's very interesting that cataracts is used here. There's also something called amblyopia, and this is called lazy eye. And this is really interesting because it's when the brain and the eye are not in sync. So the eye organ, the faculty, doesn't have macular degeneration, it doesn't have cataracts or glaucoma, but the brain and the eye don't connect. And so the actual seeing is off. I guess we're already reached our time limit tonight. I want to talk about maybe this more a little bit next week, but we'll pause here. The final line is that such a person could never understand the Supreme Dharma. And again, just pointing to this, it doesn't say that ordinary people cannot understand the Supreme Dharma. This is really critical here. What it's saying is if your vision is distorted and if you're looking at things wrongly and you're using the faculty of looking wrongly. In other words, you're looking at the wrong thing and you're using the wrong faculty, using the faculty inappropriately, you will not see, you will not behold. But it's not because the Supreme Dharma is inaccessible and way out there and transcendental and it's not within reach. So again, if we read this in the incorporating way, the thrust of this text is to ask, not how do I know that Supreme Dharma, but how do I work on this so that becomes totally evident without a diseased eye, so to speak. So we'll pause here. Next week I want to talk a little bit about Heidegger because I think this ties into a really interesting idea of Heidegger about the way we understand and know. Ties into this text. So I'll save it for next week. All things being equal, I should be here next week, but one never knows. Okay, Jin Chuan, Jin Wei, I apologize if there were technical difficulties at the beginning, but I can't really apologize because even if I knew they were technical difficulties, I couldn't do anything to fix it because I'm technically a Luddite. So, did it get fixed?
Yeah, much better.
Okay.
So as Marty was going over this passage, if one uses awesome virtue, as appearance or clan, to try to look for the taming and regulating master of beings, you could say, it's like having a disease of the eyes. And through that way of seeing, it's impossible to see the true Dharma, the supreme Dharma. Now, as Marty was talking about it, I thought of, this is one way to look at it, is looking out and trying to find a teacher. Right? We look outside and we maybe think of a teacher as having a certain appearance, a certain look. Maybe they're supposed to be Asian or Western, or somebody that's familiar to me. Or maybe they should have kind of an appearance of something. Maybe they should look like somebody. So that's one way of, I think, looking at this particular passage. But I thought the way that kind of really spoke to at least myself, as Marty was sharing, is that how do we look at ourselves in this process of cultivation? Where are we looking? And I've reflected oftentimes we end up practicing from a place of attaching to some perfect image of how we're supposed to be. I was reading some materials around the monastic life. We have a kind of monastic program here. And one Theravada teacher in the Ajahn Chah tradition, at one point they had many monastics leave the community. And he wrote an article about it. And he says something very interesting that was striking to me. He says the biggest obstacle that he saw for Westerners in the spiritual life is idealism. That there's a kind of a spiritual ideal that they conceive of in their mind, and then they have these kind of unrealistic ways of trying to get there. It doesn't quite match reality. And we live in this kind of constructed projection of how we're supposed to be. And I know for myself, it's a constant reflection to catch myself going into that way of being, because I think just growing up in America, at least with the educational system, a lot is actually focused on developing the intellect. Like Marty talked about this evening, about having the kind of right idea, the right answer. And usually that's something we conceive of in the mind. Right? In school, we're taught, physics, chemistry, biology, English, what have you. And there's usually a kind of a quote-unquote right way to think about it that the school is trying to have us learn, and then we repeat it. And this deep transformation aspect of education is usually not emphasized. In elementary or middle school or high school, the teacher asks you about, transforming ourselves to have more virtue. It's not a conversation we really have in class. In developing, maybe they talk a little about developing patience, maybe elementary school, but when it gets to middle and high school, probably we're just trying to prevent kids from bullying each other. And the emphasis in classes is pretty much the intellect, getting scores on tests. And we have this ideal for how we're supposed to be. And actually, something just came up in my mind. Actually, it's a very strong example. I'll maybe just stop with that. We were just having a meeting with Monk Heng Sure today for Berkeley Monastery, and near the end of the meeting, he asked me. He says, "Oh, did you stay up with contemporary news?" I said, "Not so much." He said, "Did you hear what just happened at Stanford?" I said, "I don't know." And he said, the Stanford women's team's star goalie just committed suicide.
Did what?
Just committed suicide.
Oh.
And it was a shock to the community because on all accounts, she had a very good life. And he said, actually, this is the 4th suicide at Stanford. I don't know how many months?
1 year.
In 1 year. And he says, doesn't look good for Stanford. And I said, yeah, I can see that. And I remember having gone to college in Stanford. There was definitely an experience where you're trying to maintain this perfect image. So this disease, you could say disease of the eye, actually can lead to death, lead to a lot of misery. And I'll let the person finish there. And it's, okay, mute, shut up. Okay, so it's actually something that I think can lead to a lot of misery. I remember at Stanford there's a syndrome they call it duck syndrome. And what does that mean? Is that you imagine a duck, it says it looks very peaceful on the surface, but it's paddling like the Dickens underneath. They're just, trying to stay afloat. And that's actually what is interesting in the culture, even I would say Stanford students would admit to it, is that there's the people actually study very hard, but they have to look really cool, like they're not studying very hard, because they have to look very smart. So there's like people hide their studying to look really smart. So like it looks like they're having a lot of fun, partying, doing everything, and just school just comes very easy to them. And it's just, to me, seems to me the recipe for disaster. It's not education for a deep transformation. It's education trying to maintain this perfect image. Because we're seeking what? We're seeking this awesome appearance, this perfect ideal, and it's painful. And so I think at least that's what drew me to the Dharma, was I was saying, you know what? That is a disease. There's something much deeper going on than trying to maintain a perfect appearance. And it's not just real, it's actually very liberating. It's very joyful. Life becomes much easier when then rather being in a straitjacket of our ideals and our concepts. So I just share that much. It just kind of came to me in the middle of us sharing. But I think actually this is an important place of reflection to say, why are we cultivating? Is this some perfect image we have of ourselves? Or is it actually at a deeper place of transformation, watching our minds to remove the distortions of how we see ourselves? So, yeah.
As you were talking, I just thought of something. You had awesome virtue and appearance. That's
Yeah.
really good. But to some extent, class and caste becomes identified with that particular school.
Mm-hmm.
So that you have a kind of caste or class of people that went to those particular schools that by definition is almost like a clan.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's another kind of identity. Whether it is transformative or not, it was just the fact that you were rubbed up against it, that you become part of that caste or clan. Very interesting. By the way, I think those numbers are not unique to Stanford.
Yeah, I'm guessing probably not either. Yeah, especially now with the current COVID and everything going on.
But they preceded COVID. You had a loss of the will to live among that generation. At least for the last maybe 10 to 15 years, the second leading cause of death between the 18 and 25 was suicide and what they called self-inflicted accidents. In other words, going to extremes and then almost like not caring if one lived.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to COVID, this was a major malaise among that age group. And it didn't get less with higher education. In fact, in some cases it got exacerbated. So, interesting.
Yeah.
what you have there.
I don't know if this is too downing, but it was a poem that when Monk Heng Sure said what happened, it's a poem titled Richard Cory. I'm guessing you know it. I was going to read it.
I know that one.
Because it's a very powerful poem when I first read it in high school. And honestly, having grown up in Saratoga, it like hit me at the core of like, wow.
Richard Cory.
So I'm going to read it just so it's like, whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown,
Imperially slim.
clean favored and imperially slim. Yeah. And he was always quietly arrayed. And he was always human when he talked. But still he fluttered pulses when he said, "Good morning." And he glittered when he walked. And he was rich. Yes, richer than a king. And admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. It's like, ugh.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes some experience, like reading something like that, to go, oh, wait a moment, what path am I on here? Am I looking for external forms to find happiness and thinking that that's where it's at? Or there's something much more deeper and sustaining. And often it is. It's in the simple things of just enjoying the moment, breathing, watching the mind, being with friends, caring for one another. It's in the simple things, not in the big kind of
You
perfect
know, it's
things.
interesting too, in the preparation at the colleges,
Yeah.
it used to be, when I was a college mentor, you were a house fellow and you looked over these young men. We were told, look for depression, look for poor grades, look for not going to classes, look for dropping out of activities as signs of impending suicide.
Mm-hmm.
It's now reversed.
Hyper.
It's 3 majors rather than 1, hyper successful, competing at everything and so forth. And now they say that these, in fact, are the paradoxical signs that the new form of depression is not underachievement, but going to your point of trying to stress and reach to no end to keep up with not only keep up with appearances, but keep ahead of everybody else. What you call the fear of missing out.
Fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Fear of missing out. FOMO.
FOMO, yeah. So now when you see people that are overachievers and doing everything like Richard Cory, bing, 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 alarm bells might go off. Because a lot of people, and even the parents, say, we had no idea.
Yeah.
We had no idea that he or she was like this.
Marty, in the monastery we practice jomo, joy of missing out.
The joy of missing out. Yeah, the
Jomo.
joy of missing out. Yeah, that's right. Joy of missing out. Wow, everything else is happening. I'm so happy for them.
I think that's a good bumper sticker. I'm going to look into the joy of Jomo, the joy of missing out.
Joy of missing out.
It's a lot better.
Okay, a transfer.
May every living be our minds as one and radiant with light. Share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all be become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and